YouTube, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage back, and we are going to be talking... Sorry, just making sure my microphone's on. Yeah, we're all good. Just making sure. Yeah, we're going to be finishing up the discussion on the vampires. They just announced wood elves today. I'll put up a video with a couple of thoughts on that. I really don't know much about the wood elves, but we'll talk about it in that video, and I might go read a little bit before I make it. But I wanted to, like I said, do a video kind of finishing up vampires. Maybe do a couple unit tests here and just kind of summarize my thoughts on them. And just in terms of thoughts, I mean, in my opinion, it's a close call for second behind the Empire between vampires and Greenskins. They're both very good, and the only reason I think the Empire is better is just the Empire has a better combination of units and tools that I think makes them just a little bit more tricky. But don't get me wrong, vampires can compete with anybody when played right, though obviously they do have to be more careful of some factions than others. And usually that's going to be factions who have very good mastery of ranged units, and the Empire is the best, of course, but anybody else who can do it can cause these guys trouble. But again, depending on how you want to play that, I think you have options. So some of you all wanted me to show the Black Coach in testing. I messed around with the Black Coach, and it's pretty simple. This unit does a little bit of damage when it rams infantry. It's horrible against cavalry. It does nothing against monsters. It's not good against lords, unless it's like a dwarf lord or something that it can ram over and over again. And even then, it may not be great. I'm just saying that's what this is. This unit is good at frightening cheap infantry units. And is it worth paying 1,100 to frighten cheap infantry units? Not really. So you're not going to see this unit be useful most of the time. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time testing it. What I did want to show you, though, was just kind of a couple things to be aware of with the vampires as you build your army. Sometimes you've seen me build really big armies with tons of units. But you'll notice that one thing I always do is I try and bring support units like corpse carts or necromancer, or just other units, mortis engines. You have to bring units that support vampire infantry, and I'm gonna go ahead and show you why. So what I'm gonna show you here is a unit of Graveguard with great weapons. My gosh, that background looks beautiful. And they're gonna be going up against a unit of great swords. So there's no support here for the vampires. And I want to demonstrate something here. So the Graveguard with great weapons cost quite a bit more than the great swords, and I've allowed myself to outflank the great swords a little too. Let's just kind of watch how this plays out. And remember that great swords have recently been nerfed. So we're going to watch here. It doesn't really matter who wins or loses this fight. This is just for results. So let's just see what happens. In the end, it looks like the great swords probably going to pull this off, but we'll see. It's going to be rather close, rather tight fight. 54 kills for my Graveguard, and then 47 kills for the Great Swords. Now, of course, again, remember, this is with no support on either side, which for vampires to come with zero support is not advised under any circumstance. You can see that the Graveguard pull off a narrow victory there. And had I gone in the exact same width of formation, it may not have been a narrow victory. Let's see what happens when support gets added to that. So I'll see. So what does that fight look like between Graveguard with great weapons and those great swords if we revisit it? And let's say, now, again, it's not likely you're going to see little one-on-one scenarios like this in the battlefield, but what you will see is like little micro engagements within the macro engagement, meaning the one-on-one engagements within the larger engagement, which can sometimes be swayed by other things. Obviously, the Empire can have support units well, but this is just to show. Oh, actually, I thought the great swords cost less, so my bad. So exact same cost between the Graveguard with great weapons. Let's compare these two units real quick, by the way. So great swords have less hit points, but they have more attack, more defense, far better leadership, better armor, better charge bonus, and a little bit less weapon strength. And if we compare the armor piercing damage here, you're talking 23 armor piercing up against the 26 armor piercing on the Graveguard with great weapons. 8 bonus versus infantry, and let's check that too. 8 bonus versus infantry. So similar units with a little bit of trade-offs here and there, and it was a pretty close fight. What happens if you're playing against the vampires and they have units that support them? So again, I know that a Master Necromancer cost a whole lot more than what I'm going to put up for the Empire here, but this is to demonstrate what if your great swords are trying to win a battle against Graveguard with great weapons when they're supported by a unit like this Master Necromancer. He's going to be on a corpse cart with an unholy lodestone, so he's going to get replenishment from the lodestone, replenishment from the Curse of Undeath, replenishment from the Master of the Dead, and there's going to also be replenishment from regeneration, but that's just himself, so never mind. There's going to be Vigor Mortis, which is giving melee attack and defense stats, and I'm not going to bring anything else. Well, actually I will. I'll bring Invocation and a Heck, because that's pretty feasible for the vampires to be using Invocation and a Heck. So a little bit of money spent on support again. Not super likely you're going to see a Master Necromancer on a corpse cart, but you very well could see a Necromancer. You could see corpse carts. You could see all these units out on the battlefield supporting vampire. Oh, let's go back into the tighter formation here so we don't overlap the great swords. And let's just see what this looks like as we take another engagement. Yeah, I know I normally skip up to this part, but that's okay. I'll try not to skip around as much. We're gonna keep these guys well within the support. You see Vigor Mortis here buffing the stats on these Graveguard, and it's also going to lend regeneration to them as well. I'll move my Mortis engine up so that we can stay well within the support range, which we are. So the whole time we're within the support range. The ranks are pretty even, so it's a clean hit between both sides. You'll see there, look at the replenishment going on my Graveguard with great weapons. The amount of replenishment coming from this, and this is with no active spells either. Turn around there. I don't want any interaction. Yeah, so no spells here. And remember, I can use the Invocation of Nahak as well. And so let's do that. I just want to show you, this is how vampires get dangerous. It's when you can't deal with their leaders or their specialty unions. This is why vampires are dangerous. Their units in and of themselves are not wildly impressive. In fact, a lot of them have very bad leadership. And what does that mean? Well, it means that an enemy can hit you hard and start forcing your units to crumble because your units don't rout. And if they didn't have that low leadership, the vampires would just face roll everybody without question. I mean, there's no doubt that that's what would be going on. You can see here just how hard these Graveguard are pounding the Great Swords. Only 17 kills on the Great Swords, 18 and 40 over here because of the regeneration effects. And again, that's just the passive regeneration effects. As I throw Invocation and the Heck in here, my guys are going to come out of this pretty much untouched. So what do you need to do as the vampires to be successful? You need to support your units, and you need to think about how that support works. So as you bring an army meant to counter your opponent, which vampire units are you going to be using to counter what as you come up against your opponent, and how are you going to support those units? Because vampire units don't do very well when they're outside the support radius of their leadership and their specialties. Look at that, 67 kills, and their hit points are actually climbing very quickly. During that fight, my Graveguard were able to replenish a significant amount. You can see there they can replenish up to 4,600 hit points. So they can basically be almost twice their hit points if the vampire player is supporting them right. So just, again, this is food for thought. As you're using the vampires, that's how you need to think about using them. How does the support system work, and how is that going to propel your undead armies to victory? And then if you're playing against the vampires, it's how do I kill that support system? Sometimes it even means just almost ignoring the rest of the vampire army. So that's going to allow vampires to build interesting armies sometimes. They might bring something, say like this Necromancer, and they might not put him on a corpse cart because it puts him in a pretty risky position, but they might bring him like this where he gets these 2 regeneration things. Invocation and the Heck is very cheap. And they might bring like the Curse of Years or something like that because it's not bad, and they get a relatively cheap leader. And so then the vampires can start to put together like some pretty elite troops. So maybe a Stearnsman and a couple of these guys, and they can start throwing in Blood Knights, you know, and they can have a small army. And then if they throw in the support of say like the Claw of Nagash, which sometimes the vampires like to do, and then let's say maybe a couple of Banshees or something like that. So a very small vampire army, but this little tight-knit vampire group here can cause some serious problems if you don't have a way. Because see right here, this Mortis engine affects allies within a 45-meter radius. So that's replenishment that'll make up for part of that corpse cart. What it was doing. And you know what? The vampires could easily turn around and bring a corpse cart on top of all this right here. Corpse cart with Unholy Lodestone. All I need to do is just go save 3 somewhere, which is pretty easy. I can take the Slippery off the Banshees. And then I can come over here, give them a healing or a potion of toughness. And the Banshees don't have to be the pick either. You can go with White Kings. And just even though this is a very small vampire army, this army can tank a substantial amount of damage. And the heroes here are going to be, I mean, unless you have magical attacks, they're not going to be real easy to kill. The infantry can replenish huge amounts of its health. The cavalry is very powerful. The Claw of Nagash slows units down and pulls away their hit points. And you don't have to bring the Claw of Nagash either. There's other things. So again, The vampires can field large armies in kind of a swarm, and they can also field much smaller, much more elite armies if they feel like it, and try and use their more powerful units. Just a couple of units that I want to call out as we go through that I feel like are quite good units for the vampires. The Sternsmen. The Sternsmen have regeneration of their own, plus whatever they're going to get from other units, so they can regenerate tons and tons of hit points. And they're going to be a very tough unit. They do not have a lot of armor piercing, though they do have some anti-infantry, which is close to kind of being armor piercing when they're up against infantry. But these guys, just because they get so much replenishment, they can still be a very solid unit. So I find the Sternsmen are a unit that are well worth their cost and are going to find their way into many vampire armies, if not most all of them. Cryptors are a unit that, what do you get out of these guys, and why are they so good? Armor piercing, poison, and regeneration all in one. These guys are weak to missile fire, and that's going to be one of their big time downfalls, but these guys are going to be poisoning enemy units while dishing armor piercing damage. If they can stay clear of missile fire, Cryptors are going to pay dividends. So definitely a solid unit in the vampire lineup. A lot of people have been saying these guys are OP for a long time. Let's just take a look at a few other units that may be a little bit misunderstood or not as much used. Knights with lances and barding actually have a pretty significant charge bonus. If we take a look, let's compare them to the Blood Knights. And obviously there's some pretty key differences here, but if we look, the Blood Knights have more charge, more melee defense, more melee attack. They also have better leadership, though they have a little bit less weapon strength and hit points. Now, of course, Blood Knights also have Frenzy, so I mean, a Blood Knight's a crazy good unit, but you can see here that, you know, for a relatively fair cost here at 1200, that's a massive charge bonus. And really the only downside of these guys is they don't have much melee defense, but if they can get in a couple of critical charges on infantry, this will be an absolutely devastating unit in terms of how much damage it can cause. It also causes fear, so in a rear charge, that can be pretty critical. So I think Knights with Lances and Barding are an okay choice if you're looking to save a little bit of money. So it's just something to consider there. Verax Reavers have regeneration, so it's a Knights with Lances and Barding with regeneration, so something to consider. Blood Knights are a fantastic unit. They are very expensive, but because they can be supported by the Invocation and the Heck and all the regeneration, it definitely makes them worth it, and it's probably good that they cost this much. Some people might say, well, Empire or Demigryph Knights are a lot better, and well, I mean, I think when you combine Demigryph Knights with the Net of Emmentalk, yes, they're definitely better, and you get away with a slightly better cost. But again, it's the replenishment and the other stuff that goes into these Blood Knights that makes them pretty dangerous, something that the Empire doesn't have. Talk about a few other units that can be helpful. Fell Bats are an interesting one. These guys don't get used a ton anymore because they got nerfed a little bit, but Fell Bats are fantastic at stopping charges of both cavalry, infantry, and flying monsters. They can be a huge nuisance if used properly. They're not cheap at 350, but for what you can get out of them, sometimes they can pay off. Is it worth paying 700 gold to keep an enemy cavalry unit from getting its charge? Can be, if it helps your Blood Knights win the battle. Is it worth it if these guys get in and slow down skirmishers and artillery while you make your approach? Yeah, absolutely. That can sometimes be worth it. It might keep your Mortis engine alive. It might keep your Lord alive. So I think Fell Bats are a unit worth calling out as well. Now, a couple other units just to bear in mind. If you're going up against a faction that lacks a lot of magical attack, say like the Beastmen, for instance, you could potentially put some good things to use, like the Banshees. These ethereal units are immune to physical resistance up to 80%, I believe. Yep. So that means that 80% of all physical damage, that means any damage coming from a unit that doesn't have this little magical attack here, is not going to do 80% of the damage that it would normally hit on another unit. So they are low hit points. They do have potions, though, which makes them pretty interesting. Be very, very careful of anything with these magical attacks. So Grombrindle, Thorgrim, Ethereal Thanes, or other ethereal units. You're going to have to watch out for Aspiring Champions. Spells like Spirit Leech and other stuff like that can be very effective. So again, just know the strengths of some of these units. White King, I actually find the White King to be a very nice hero to go along with vampires. It has got some pretty solid weapon strength for a support unit, like it is. Let's go in and find our Empire Captain. If you look at the Empire Captain, only 375 weapon strength here, and if we compare these two units, let's compare the White King to the Empire Captain. The White King gets a lot less charge, but he has considerably more health. better armor, better leadership. A little less speed, a little less melee attack, but again, look at the melee defense, very solid, and the weapon strength, very solid as well. And then there's an interesting ability that comes with the White King, so let's click on him, go over here and do abilities, and it's this heroic killing blow. I find that a lot of times you can probably just leave this deadly onslaught behind. Sometimes it's handy, but since these guys, I mean, it could be handy with them, but sometimes to save money, I'll just bring the Foe Seeker in this because it keeps them from getting as tired, which means their performance stays good. And then this heroic killing blow can give them quite a lot of extra damage. And of course, if you combined it with this, that's just even more damage that they can do. And the White King can be a pretty devastating foe. Now, he can't fly around like some of the other heroes can, but he can get up to this Barded Skeletal Seed, which again makes him a fairly formidable foe, and they have access to a potion as well. So definitely things to consider. I think the White King is a good unit. There's probably a lot of other things I could say about the vampires. Let's just cover a few of them. So when it comes to lords, I like Vlad von Karstein when it comes to having a lord who's going to be going up against what you think is going to be an infantry-heavy foe, because I feel like Vlad does well supporting infantry because he's really hard to kill. Unless you get a whole lot of concentrated charges. So if you put him in the middle of a bunch of like spears or something and have him supporting a fight, he can be a nuisance to kill because he replenishes so much, and he's good against balls of enemy infantry. Manfred von Karstein is a pretty solid leader, and he can go all the way up to the zombie dragon, and this vampire lord is kind of a Manfred light. The biggest difference is he only has access to the lore of vampires, whereas Manfred has access to 2 lores of magic, which is going to be vampires and death. So Manfred kind of has like this nice little sweet spot where he can hit you with Spirit Leech, Aspect of Dread Knight, Wind of Death, Invocation to Heck. He's got a lot of options at his disposal. Curse of Years. So Manfred is very expensive, but potentially comes with lots and lots of different options. And like I said, can be mounted on a Barded Nightmare, a Hellsteed, or a zombie dragon. So it gives you, again, a lot of options with them. So I like it. I think that it makes Manfred a pretty solid lord. Now, Strigoi is one that's been added a little more recently that I really feel like Stragoi's got a lot of good stuff to offer as well. The biggest thing with Strigoi is that when you put him up on this Terrorgeist, he gets a bonus versus large. And it's not an insignificant amount. It's a 40 bonus versus large. Now, a lot of people don't like to fight head-to-head against aerial battles as the vampires against certain factions, but don't underestimate Strigoi. He's not like crazy strong, but he is definitely a solid pick, and for him, again, it's an interesting combination of spells. He gets a little bit of vampires and a little bit of death. So it gives him access to Spirit Leech, Nehek, and this ability to spawn Crypt Horrors or Crypt Ghouls, and also the Soul Blight and Doom and Darkness. So potentially a nice option there with Strigoi Ghoul King as well. There's probably a lot more that could be said about the vampires. Tell me what else that you think that I should have covered here. But overall, obviously a very solid, very dangerous faction, not one to be underestimated, and definitely a faction I think that takes kind of subpar units. If you just look at some of the stats, some of them, not all units. Obviously units like Crypt Horrors and others are great units, but a lot of their infantry is subpar, but you combine them with the fact that they have cheap meat shields, lots of great magic, and lots of great support units, and that's what makes the vampires dangerous. They don't rout. Their leadership has to be broken, and that's done by killing their leaders or their support units. And sometimes that's easier said than done, and that's what the vampires rely on. They're a faction that fights kind of battles of attrition. They want to wear you down. They want to fight that long game because that's where they're going to excel. They're able to regenerate. They're able to keep relying on the power of the magic of undeath there. So anyway, great faction. They're a lot of fun. And just a couple of closing words too. Let's talk about them a little bit in campaign. So how do the vampires stack up in campaign? They're a fun faction to play. They have access to several different lords here, so you can get Helmungorst, Vlad, Heinrich Kimmler, or Manfred, though Kimmler's pretty craptacular. But they're a fun faction to play in campaign. They get the Raise the Dead option, so you can just quickly stack up armies, and as you destroy other factions' armies, it makes these piles of corpses where you can just keep raising the dead. It is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun, and you're going to find yourself really enjoying the campaign. You just have to make sure that you keep your vampiric corruption expanding at all time, and it kind of forces the other provinces to slowly fall to you. even if you're not at war with them. They are in a bit of a predicament when they start off. They got dwarfs, they have other vampires, the Empire likes to push on you, chaos comes down into your realms. But I think the fact that you get access to that Raise the Dead and so many other good things in campaign that it makes the vampires probably one of the stronger campaign factions in my opinion, especially as you get to late game. It's already pretty easy to face roll people in the late game if you're a good player, but the vampires for sure, as they get into the late game, they can really stomp on people. And I don't know, it just makes them very interesting. Would be curious, I guess, if you're playing with a friend on Legendary and one of you controlled the vampires and the other one controlled the Empire, it'd be like the unstoppable, unholy alliance. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the vampires. My other thoughts on the vampires, I know they're not exactly the same, but they make me want Tomb Kings. But hey, I'm excited for Wood Elves for now. We'll go check that out. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I'll see you all soon.